Have you ever felt powerless? Which is kind of easy to feel in a world governed by tyrants who make decisions on a weekly whim. Have you ever felt left out? Have you ever been in a crisis where there seems to be no way out? Well, today we have the gospel story of a woman who was in a crisis. And when she came to Jesus to heal her daughter, he refused, and she made him change his mind. Perhaps she can give us some courage. Today is also the first Sunday of Lent. Lent is a time to do some deeper reflection on our inner selves in hopes of encountering Jesus. Our story might help us with that as well. Lent is a perfect time to have communion because by participating, we open ourselves to encounter Jesus. And our story even has bread as part of the plot. And then we have Pink Shirt Day, the last Wednesday of February. I'm married to a kindergarten teacher, so I know about these things. Pink Shirt Day is about being kind and inclusive of diversity. And this is the point of our story as well. So, the state of the world, Lent, communion, Pink Shirt Day, the woman who made Jesus change his mind, and us. They are all connected. We just heard the gospel story read. And many people have been perplexed by this story. Our series is called Encounters with Jesus. But in some ways, this story might be more accurately titled, Jesus Encounters a Woman. The reason this story is troubling for people and not often preached on is because Jesus does not seem to act like Jesus. Now, Mark and Matthew, who include this story in their Gospels, could have left it out and made things easier on us. Why did they include a story that seems to be contrary to almost all other stories about Jesus? Keep that question in the back of your minds as we examine the story. As the story opens, Jesus is not in his usual territory. Jesus spent most of his time around Lake Galilee, but now he's far away from the usual crowds. Tyre is at least 40 miles from Capernaum, which was his usual kind of place of ministry. So it would have been at minimum a long day's walk, probably 2 days. So why was he there? We are not told. Maybe Jesus needed to get away from the rush and hurry for a quiet retreat where perhaps nobody would know him. But being Jesus, it was impossible for him to get away. Jesus' reputation as a healer preceded him, and a local woman finds him. She is identified as Greek in Mark's account and a Canaanite by Matthew. Canaanite is really close to a racial slur. Both terms would indicate that she is an outsider, not a Jew, not one of God's people. To Jews of that time, it was a binary world. Jews and everybody else. Kind of like some Christians today sometimes divide the world into Christians and non-Christians, saved and unsaved, us and them. This woman was a them. She does not even have a name. So I'm going to change that this morning and give her a name. Syra. Mark simply says Syra came and fell at Jesus' feet, but Matthew adds more details, saying that she is causing a disturbance and is yelling for Jesus to come and heal her daughter, who has been suffering terribly. Syra was desperate. She was traumatized. Imagine being the parent of a sick child with a terrible illness that there was no diagnosis or cure for, and all you can do is watch them suffer. With that desperation, she comes to Jesus, and what does Jesus do or say in response? Nothing. Jesus does nothing and says nothing. Jesus always heals people. All the bleeding woman that we heard about a few weeks ago had to do was touch him, and she was healed. All the blind man had to do was ask Jesus to see, and Jesus mixed some mud and saliva, and he saw. In Jesus' silence, the disciples jump in to attempt to protect Jesus. Send her away. She keeps shouting at us. Other times, when the disciples tried to shoo people away, Jesus rebuked them and said, "Let them come to me." Although we don't know the tone of his voice, he makes what today could be seen as a racist statement, or at least ethnocentrism. My mission is only to the Jewish people. Commentators who are quick to defend Jesus say he's just testing her to see if she's genuine. Other commentators say that Jesus began with a limited mission to the Jews and then later expanded it to include more people, as kind of the story of the New Testament. We already know in Luke chapter 4, verses 14 to 30, Jesus had used Elisha's healing of Nathan the Syrian and the widow of Zarephath's son, both non-Jews, by the way, as examples of how his mission was to all people. So why this reluctance in this case? If you're looking for a nice, neat, packaged answer, I haven't got it, because I have found no satisfying explanation, other than perhaps I'm focusing on the wrong question. Let's focus on Syra. What is clear is that Syra does not give up. She does not take no for an answer. She tries another tactic and falls on her knees, a sign of submission and surrender. Lord, please help me. Who would not melt under such a plea? Jesus' response instead was typical of a first-century Jewish male who felt himself a few steps up from a Canaanite single mother. He's probably quoting a familiar Jewish line, "It is not good to toss the children's bread to the dogs." And even if Jesus would be testing Syra, there's no way this statement comes across as anything else but harsh. The Jews are the children who get to eat at the table, and Syra's people are the pet puppies who are waiting under the table. Yet Syra is undeterred and has an incredible comeback. "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall under the master's table." Boom! It's brilliant. It's biting. Doesn't it make you want to stand up and cheer? Now, we don't know Syra's tone either. Was it really humble? Was it sarcastic? Was it angry? Was it bold? Or was she just still desperate? It doesn't matter. The argument was forceful and strong. Sarah calls Jesus master and acknowledges her lowly status, but fires back that even underdogs have rights. And she's only asking for crumbs. Sarah made Jesus change his mind. Jesus is impressed. According to Matthew, Jesus says, "Dear woman, you have great faith. It will be just as you wish." And right then, her daughter is healed. Mark puts it this way: "Good answer. Go on home. The demon has already left your daughter." Rachel Conrad Wahlberg, in her book, Jesus According to a Woman, prefers Mark's version when she writes, "Obviously, a story which is recorded some decades after it happens cannot perfectly record the nuances of tone or exact phrasing of a sentence, even a climactic one. Good answer indicates that Jesus responded specifically to her argument. It was not just her faith that impressed him, it was her bright, forceful, and intelligent answer. Jesus endorses the very spirit of the woman, her indomitable, snappy spirit. Her faith was already indicated in her first appeal for help, and Jesus had been somewhat cool to that. But through their interaction, he became aware of her as a person and finally responded as the healer that he was." End quote. There is no doubt that Sarah, the Canaanite woman, is the hero of this story. Lent calls us to self-reflection. What can we learn from Sarah, the Canaanite woman? Perhaps instead of trying to figure out the tone and motive of Jesus in the story, we should ask a different question. And I'll ask it again that I asked at the beginning. Why do Mark and Matthew include this story in their gospel accounts? That might help us to understand what this story says to us today. To help us to understand the story, let's look at the larger context in the Gospels. Both Matthew's and Mark's Gospels have the same context. Matthew probably relied on Mark. Mark is the earliest Gospel written, probably about 20 or 30 years after the death of Christ, and Matthew another generation after that. In Mark chapter 6, 7, and 8, in fact, in those three chapters, bread is mentioned 17 times, including in our particular story, bread for the Jews, crumbs for the Canaanite. It's all about bread in this section. This story is part of this larger section, bookended with the feeding of the 5,000 in Mark 6 and Matthew 14, and then bookended on the other end with the feeding of the 4,000 in Mark 8 and Matthew at the end of Matthew 15. In both stories, Jesus made sure there was enough bread for all. And then just before our story, in Mark 7 and Matthew 15, there's a prolonged argument with Jewish leaders about ritual purity and how to wash your hands before you eat bread and so on. The implication? Bread on the table is only for the pure Jews. And then in the next story, a Canaanite woman claims the crumbs on the floor. Crumbs are still bread. Canaanites are people too. What the gospel writers are trying to do with this story is to expand the worldview of their readers. Their readers were primarily Jewish Christians. They were trying to help them to expand their worldview to include all people in God's salvation story, not just Jews. Jewish Christians already identified themselves with Jesus in a strong way. And so if Jesus changed his mind about Syra, the uppity Greek woman from Tyre, perhaps they might be convinced to open their minds to become inclusive of diverse people in their Christian fellowships. This is a major theme in perhaps the entire New Testament, captured in this story that Mark and Matthew relate. And we could look at Matthew and Mark in their own Gospels. That is a theme in their Gospels, is the expansion of the story for all people. So if they can help the Jewish Christians who identify with Jesus and see Jesus change his mind and expanded, perhaps they can be challenged to expand their worldviews. After Jesus healed Syra's daughter, he moved on to heal others on the shore of Lake Galilee, and then he provides bread for an intergenerational crowd that included men, women, and children, and probably both Jews and Gentiles. All came and all left satisfied. That follows our story. Remember the bread context. So what is this saying to us on this first Sunday of Lent when we have communion? Communion is both a sign of healing and a sign of inclusion. We practice an open communion at Emmanuel. All are welcome to take bread, and not just the crumbs that fall on the floor. A few weeks ago at our AGM, we accepted a new vision statement that calls us to be intergenerational, diverse, and inclusive. As we come to the table, look around at the diverse people coming forward. We may feel like Canaanites who deserve only crumbs, yet all are invited. Insist on it. Receive God's healing. Take the bread of peace. Take the bread of belonging.